But what was being shown to me over time was that I was feeling better. And that's what kept me hooked on living the healthier lifestyle. It didn't keep me hooked on the weight dropping down. So I find that similar with my clients. It's like, sure, start out with the diet culture thoughts. You kind of know you don't want them, but you kind of know they're there, but like they do something when you stop on the scale, and it does you have an expectation that it's going to go down and it's gone up and blah, blah, blah. Great. But as you stick with the healthy habits, as you allow them to be as boring as brushing your teeth, you then start to feel better. And I think that really starts to rise without us having to take a lot of effort, because I think a lot of efforting also ties into diet culture. We think it has to be hard. We think it has to be arduous. We think we have to think a lot.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Reshape Your Health podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Morgan Nolte, and we are talking about one of my favorite things on today's episode, and that is weight loss mindset and sustainable weight loss. Our guest is Lucia Hawley, and she is a women's wellness coach and personal trainer living in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She helps women ages 30 plus end the mental habits of yo-yo dieting and weight loss resistance with the principles of mindfulness, self-compassion, and scientifically backed nutrition and strength training techniques. She's the host of the Mindfulness-Based Weight Loss Podcast with over 275 episodes of free in your pocket coaching and client success stories. Lucia, thank you so much for joining me today and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm just thrilled to be here.
Yeah, well, let's get started just kind of with your personal background and what got you interested in this weight loss and wellness space.
Sure. So I was a child of the 90s, and in the 90s, I'm sure you and I can talk plenty about diet culture as the conversation goes. But back in the 90s, diet culture conversation and focus on your weight and what you looked like was very rampant. And I had childhood obesity. I was 80 pounds overweight. And even though I grew up with parents that loved to cook at home, we had a lot of homemade meals, course, fun processed packaged foods too. I had no idea about nutrition and how nutrition worked, or macronutrients, protein, carbohydrates, fats. So actually at the time, my parents put me on the Atkins diet, which really didn't feel like a diet at the time, because it opened my eyes so dramatically to the power that nutrition has, not only on how our bodies function, so whether that's gaining weight, having more energy, but also how our bodies feel. You know, I was this kid that maybe had less energy than other kids because of that increase in weight, but I also had daily headaches. You know, I had joint pain. I had aches that really aren't hopefully super common for kids at that age. So that was, you know, the huge catalyst for me to really see like, whoa, hold up. Nutrition is very powerful. And if it's powerful for me as someone, I loved food, you know, like I love to be in the kitchen. I love to cook. If it was powerful for me, who else could it be powerful for? So that really started things off at a very young age.
Yeah. So how old were you when you lost the 80 pounds on Atkins?
I was between 13 and 14.
And then did you maintain that? Like I think of college years, especially like when your parents aren't really monitoring your nutrition anymore, like how did you keep that weight off?
Yeah. So for the most part, I kept the majority of the weight off, kind of 20 pounds came back over time. And remember, you know, I was still adolescent. So as I grew, I also I'm tall, 6 feet tall. So I grew and kind of, became an adult, and I did gain some weight, primarily because, the Atkins diet is so dramatically low carbohydrate that in that day and age and with my resources, I really didn't have a lot of information about how to healthfully reincorporate carbohydrates. So yes, I did gain some weight and kind of had to come back to that conversation and learn a little bit more about nutrition in terms of calories and macronutrient balance.
Yeah. Did you study that in college, or was this kind of an adult passion of yours?
Yeah. So in college, I studied psychology and then social work, clinical mental health. And then this was my total side passion. Any book I had for years. I mean, even now, it's all nutrition. I just love it.
That's awesome. So I'm sure the psychology is going to come into play here. And that's something that I really noticed as a weight loss coach was you don't get very far if all you're doing is talking about strategy with people, because goodness sakes, people know they should drink water. And so many people are not drinking enough water a day. How simple is that? So with your background in psychology, how did you, first of all, use that for your own health journey? And then how do you use that with your clients' health journeys? I'm really interested in that mindset side of it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the mindset is the powerful part, isn't it? Because really, like you just said, we all know vegetables, they're healthy. Water, yeah, we should drink some. Working out or going for a walk, it would probably help us feel good, but how many of us don't do that? So, yeah, I think with that background in psychology, it just really turned me on to the idea that as humans, we have thoughts, we think thoughts. And many of us, whether we know it or not, the thoughts can be charged with emotions. We can take certain thoughts super seriously, and other ones we might naturally just kind of brush off of our shoulders.
Yeah.
So starting to understand and unpack that, wait a second, all thoughts, none of them are personal to me. Thoughts are going to come and go. When I'm more stressed out, thoughts, I might take those thoughts more seriously. And for my clients, I think just for humans in general, we all kind of have a similar story, whether we know it or not, of taking our thoughts seriously. So I find that really huge for clients, is not to say that our thoughts don't matter, but start to understand what is the difference between a thought that springs up when we're stressed out or wanting to kind of reinforce maybe a habit that isn't so healthy versus an insight, right? The type of thought we might think when we're relaxed, when we're feeling peaceful or we're feeling contented.
Well, and when you're saying that, I'm just thinking of the average person, and like, it is a daily effort on my part to carve out that time for relaxation and reflection. And I think so many people, especially coming out of this season of COVID, where you've like been, I think a lot of people either had, there were extremes. You were either in survival mode, or you were like, I have so much time on my hands, I don't know what to do. So it was like this big self-discovery, a couple of years. But like, let's just say that they're on the survival mode and they're coming out of that state of like chronic stress and worry. How do you incorporate this mindfulness, into your wellness journey? Like, where do you really recommend people start? Because you're right. Like, the thoughts that are produced from a state of urgency or stress are different, and they have a different charge to them, and you're going to get a different outcome from them versus the insights and thoughts that you get when you're in that kind of parasympathetic state of rest, relax, unwind. So what do you recommend people start doing to become more mindful along their health journey?
Yeah. So first of all, if resting and relaxing or incorporating mindfulness, if it feels like another to-do on your to-do list, are you really going to do it? Which if you're coming from that stress, not so much. So to me, coming to it from a bit of a, different doorway in the house of mindfulness, if you will, is coming to it. Let's do it with some playfulness, So I often ask people like, well, do you have a dog? Do you have a cat? Do you have, just something? Go play with that dog for 5 minutes. Go play fetch or tug of war. That's, it can be different than sitting and being in a meditation or being in that type of mindfulness, but it all counts. Our parasympathetic state is going to respond to anything that offers it that ability to come home and feel, okay, in the moment, I am safe. And to me, that's what mindfulness is reinforcing. So playing, curiosity, there are all these other emotions that also support coming into the present moment. So I would come to it from that doorway.
If they're in kind of that state of fight or flight, chronic stress, okay, maybe don't schedule time to meditate because that's almost like a different wavelength, essentially. It's too much of a jump from that worry, that stress to like, oh, now I'm not doing anything. But maybe make it more of an active relaxation is what you're saying?
Exactly. Whatever feels accessible to you. Go watch some YouTube videos of, goofy, again, I always talk about animals because I feel like they're so neutral, but some goofy cat videos, whatever in the moment sounds like it might be a little bit fun. And that can be hard to access sometimes too. So that might be the work. And for that day, that might be enough of really saying like, no, I'm going to just sit down and have a good time for 4 minutes. Great. We'll come to the mindfulness later on because it's all part of it.
I think it's important to recognize like your personal rhythm of life. Like, I don't know about you, but I was taught, you got to work hard all the time.
You're Midwesterner, just like we were talking about before. Those good old Midwestern values.
Work hard, sleep when you're dead. What were some? Sacrifice is a big one. Yeah. I never took a lunch. Like, honest to goodness, like working as a PT, working for myself, it's so easy to skip that relaxation time in the middle of the day. But today, Today I did it. Today I watched Suits for 45 minutes on my lunch break.
There you go.
Just
and
because
how did
I
it
can.
feel?
It was amazing. And it's like it's my favorite thing. It's like, why work for myself if I can't watch Suits over my lunch break, you know?
Yeah.
But it feels weird. So when you start incorporating these principles of mindfulness, or when you start incorporating self-care, whatever that looks like for you, it's going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel like you're being unproductive. It's going to feel like it's going against your beliefs. And so for me, what I've done, and I want to know what you coach your clients on, is I teach people to write something called a personal faith formula. It's like a wellness vision statement, however you want to say it. And in mine, because I knew that this was a tendency to overwork, to not come down throughout the day. And what was happening then was I'm like, oh my gosh, I need hours of decompression time at night after the kids are in bed, because I'm not taking regular pulses to rest and relax throughout my day. So I said, I create intentional margin time to read, rest, learn, play, and sleep. And then when you're telling yourself that every day from the principle of autosuggestion, your brain has to go about like looking for ways to make that happen. And so for me, I'm on the lookout throughout the day of like, how am I resting today? How am I playing today? How am I learning today? How am I sleeping today? So I think the principle of autosuggestion has been really powerful for me. I don't know if you learned about that in psychology, or if maybe you want to elaborate on that and how you use that with your clients.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So with my clients, one thing that we do is that we look at core values. And core values, there's so many different, anyone can look up. You can just type in core values sheet, and Google is going to give you some pretty great lists of terms, and you can go through them. There are lots of different ways to do it, but you can circle the ones that just speak to you, and you don't have to define why it speaks to you, but there might be a term. Again, playfulness, curiosity, safety, whatever your core values might be. And you can do a practice of looking at the terms, whittling them down to 10, taking a breather, whittling them down to 5, maybe 3, whatever speaks to you. And I find that looking at those core values and understanding that they might change over time, right? Our life, we change, we flex, right? We learn things. That's part of life. But starting to just hone in on a few phrases, I find that helpful for my clients, because those healthy habits, right? The walking, the drinking water, that's not really going to change too much from person to person, but how we implement them, of course, those are going to be different. So I like to start it kind of from that values approach.
Can you give some examples of like how someone's values might change their plan of implementation for, let's use water and walking, for example?
For sure. Yeah. I just had a client just this past week. We were talking about her values, because something that she knows. So my clients, at least when they're starting out, they're tracking their macros. I just want them to get that super efficient download of information. And so she was noticing, she's a mom of 2 kind of younger kids. And she was noticing her tracking for her macronutrients during the weeks were very different than her weekends. Just in the last couple of months. During the summer, it was fine, but something was shifting over the last couple of months. And so what we noticed just through chatting, right? We didn't even have to do a really super specific to-do list type of activity together. But what we noticed is that one of her values is not being on her phone in front of her kiddos on the weekends. So instead of her, and she was feeling guilty. She's like, I'm sorry, I'm not logging. I'm not doing it right. And I was like, oh, hold the front door. This whole practice, right? These structures, they're to support you, right? Because what we do that feels supportive, that aligns with our values, that supports our inner wisdom, that's the stuff that we're going to want to keep on doing. So then we made the simple shift of she still wants to have some sort of structure to her eating on the weekend. So come Friday night, she just jots down on a piece of paper and it goes on the fridge. Here's my intentions. And she's practiced it already and it's felt wonderful. So a little bit, I know that's a little bit of a different answer, but that's just the example that comes to my mind because it was such a beautiful practice of like, yeah, we're not trying to have you be tied to your phone on the weekends. There's nothing magical, in tracking your macros. It's the intentionality.
Don't you think that values really play into eating behaviors too? Like, I tell this story a lot that when I was growing up, my mom said it's more important that people feel comfortable around you than you feel comfortable around them. And so I learned how to be an emotional chameleon and build rapport very quickly with people. And, sometimes I think that plays into food peer pressure. It's like if someone's offering you something to eat and you were told you need to make people comfortable, okay, I'm going to eat that so that I don't make them uncomfortable by rejecting them. And so do you kind of help people tease out like what beliefs or values are you holding on to that aren't serving you anymore with your eating habits, or how do you reconcile those with your clients?
Yeah, it comes through taking action. So for sure, because I have a lot of clients that are very people pleasing or type A, very perfectionistic, and it's gotten them really far in life, right? So we don't want to belittle that or say that those are inappropriate behaviors. We want to say, maybe everything's kind of a double-edged sword. So for those clients, it's really kind of starting to understand that like it's a practice. And once you're in action, then you'll start to see. So for sure, I've seen clients where no, Lucia, wait a second. I had this whole meal planned and then my husband came home and he brought this or that. And now I'm having all these thoughts about the food that he brought home, after work or whatever. And it's beautiful portal. Every time we take action with our eating, there's no way you can mess it up, is what I like to tell my clients. It's a beautiful portal into exactly what you were just saying. What is it that we are believing and how are we acting? And if it doesn't feel like it's incongruence, beautiful. Let's take small baby steps where we can start to shift that, because probably there isn't a black or white answer. And when we're stressed out and we're in that stress thinking, that's when our brains really want things to be super like yay or nay, this or that. And I think that's part of sustainability, is allowing our stress thinking to want it to be very black or white, and really shifting over into, that's okay that you want that, brain. I see why you want that. And actually, there are probably a lot of shades of gray here for choices.
Yeah. So you mentioned inner wisdom, and I think that this is something that's important to me. Like every day I tell myself I act out of energetic alignment, which means if I don't feel like doing something that day and sometimes you just got to do stuff, right? Because you run the business or whatever. But I'm getting better and better at being sensitive to my intuition. And we were talking offline about how I can recognize when I'm going against that, and it always comes to bite me in some way, shape, or form. And so I would love to just dig into that inner wisdom a little bit more. And first off, what is it? Like, what is our intuition? What is our inner wisdom?
Yeah. So to me, and I do think it differs person to person. So if my description of what inner wisdom is doesn't resonate with someone, that's okay, right? Like we all might have our own little ping of what it means to us more individually. But to me, the inner wisdom is our intuition, and our intuition is our ability. I almost think about it like, so we have thoughts, right? Which we've been mentioning. And I mentioned a couple of minutes ago that when we have our stress thoughts, those are the thoughts that they have more urgency to them. We feel like we need to pursue them or we need to push against them. There's more reaction to them. Whereas insights, intuition, inner wisdom, those are more of like the thoughts that stick with us. They hang with us, or a little bit closer, and this might sound a little woo-woo, but whatever, a little bit closer to our heart versus up in our head. So I know that's a looser description, but that's the best way I can describe it, is that inner wisdom, say, for example, with food, right? If you're trying to figure out something around your food and your eating behaviors, if you have a thought come to you, fantastic. Doesn't mean you have to act on it right away. See what happens after a couple of days, after you've had a higher mood and a lower mood, you're stressed out getting the kids out the door in the morning, you've had a nice date night, whatever. And then notice, does that thought stick around regardless of my mood? That tends to be more of that inner wisdom. And those have less urgency to them, those bits of wisdom.
What would be some example thoughts like that you have? I think of when people step on the scale and they see the highest weight that they've ever been, and they're like, oh my gosh, I have to fix this right now.
Yeah.
I'm going to go keto, or I'm going to fast for 48 hours, or, those types of urgent thoughts, I think lead to more of the restrictive yo-yo dieting type of thing. What are some examples that you can think of either from your own life, your client's life, about urgent thoughts related to weight loss?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, that example that you gave is such a good and such a common one, because who hasn't stepped on that darn scale? Or you see a photo, right? A photo that you see it, on Facebook or Instagram, and you're tagged in it and you're like, oh, I look like this, I look like that. I didn't think. All those thoughts, the ones that just come immediately. To me, the inner wisdom is when you just take those thoughts with a grain of salt and you depersonalize that whole loop or almost train of thought that you can go down. Because what I also find with a lot of my clients is that because they can be, a little bit perfectionistic, and that's because they've solved stuff, they do stuff, right? Like they're taking care of business every day at home, at work, like they do all the things, they're amazing. But often I have clients who want to fix their thinking. They don't want to have that train of thought anymore. So then they go about, well, how do I fix it? How do I make it better? Right. So to me, again, that gets into a little bit of that all or nothing, black or white, either or that thinking. We don't have to solve for the train of thought that arises when we step on the scale. We don't have to solve that if we overeat at night, right? It's super common. If you're not used to kind of feeding yourself a breakfast, a lunch, you kind of power through your day, right? This is such a common example. And then I have clients that get totally mad at themselves. They're like, I know I should be eating better meals, but here I am. I dove into the bag of pretzels and I had ice cream, right? Like those can be some of those recurring thoughts. The whole thing here is that you just notice. And it's going to be uncomfortable at first. That's the awareness. The self-compassion is that there's nothing you have to fix when you're noticing your behavior, because that fixing energy is also another thought, right? That fixing energy reinforces there's something bad or wrong here. And a lot of people don't like that, or that feels sticky, because they can then say, but it's unhealthy to be having the ice cream. It's unhealthy that I'm eating that many carbs or whatever. We'll get there. But the first step is just that practice of stepping back from the thought loop, of not having to fix it and just noticing it for what it is, which to me is a stress response. That's what that thought loop is, or stepping on the scale, right? You feel a big emotion, you feel the urgent thought, and then that's a stress response. So we don't have to fix our stressors. They can show us what we're thinking. They sure do. They make us feel it whether we want it or not, but that's okay. We can tolerate that. So it's kind of building your tolerance to those thoughts.
I think that's a good way to put it. I want to dig into it because I know people listening are like, well, that's not good enough for me. I'm going to have to fix it someday. Okay, that's a fine first step, but what are we doing next? I had the analogy of like, sometimes when you're talking to your spouse, you just want them to listen to you. You don't want them to try to solve your problems. You just want them to show you compassion and empathy and say, you're right, honey, it's okay, or it's all going to work out. And so maybe if you're experiencing this stress response to the scale, or you're going down a negative thought spiral, like you said, like remind yourself that you don't have to solve this problem right now. You can choose to express compassion to yourself by empathetic listening and let it fall. Pretend like you're just listening to the thoughts and you don't have to fix the thoughts, and you're aware of the thoughts, but you're also aware that you have the power to think something else. So let's kind of move in that direction, is like, okay, how do we go from being aware of these thoughts? And I'm like, let's use Halloween candy, for example. So we're recording this November 1. And I think that Halloween candy is a great opportunity for people to recognize their attachment to food, their attachment to candy, their attachment to nostalgic eating. And I know growing up, I would just gorge on it, and then as an adult, I would hang around and have 3 pieces a day. And then maybe the next year I'd have 2 pieces a day after Halloween. And then I'd have 1 piece a day. And then I was so sad when all my Halloween candy ran out that I had to go buy Christmas candy. And then I'd get better and say, okay, I'm going to allow myself 3 pieces of candy on Halloween and then none after, and then 1 piece of candy. And then this year I didn't even want it. I wanted none of it. And it's like, I know what that does to my body. I know what it does to my mind. I didn't even look at it. You know how sometimes when you really want some food, you look at it and you create this whole story and this fantasy in your head about how it's going to taste, and
you're romancing it for sure. Yeah.
You romance over the food. And I didn't even go there this year. I didn't even look at the Twix and be like, that was my favorite candy as a child. I just love how the cookie part melts in my mouth, and how I can I don't know, just gum over the caramel, how you can do it. But I didn't. And so it's taken years to really redefine that relationship with Halloween candy, and also to not feel guilty throwing it out. I got this nasty comment on Instagram when I told people about the Switch Witch, which is trade your kids Halloween candy for a present. And they were like, why don't you just let them trick or treat at 10 houses and then stop? And I'm like, yeah, you tell that to a 3 and a 5-year-old. Okay. Absolutely not. I'm not going to ruin their childhood with restricting their trick-or-treating. I'd much rather exchange it and teach them, using it as an opportunity to teach them. We are choosing to make a healthier choice. You can keep some candy, but let's not keep it all. Let's exchange it for something that you want more, that's better for you. So, I think that people this time of year just have a lot of attachments to food. And so where do we start? Like me 10 years ago thinking, I can't not eat this candy. I can't not do it. So like, what do you even recommend to someone who's in that headspace? Maybe they have some leftover Christmas candy, or I don't know when this one's going to air. Maybe it's close to Valentine's Day.
Yeah, right.
Valentine's Day candy. Same thing.
Yeah.
What do we do? What do we do about that thought that, oh my gosh, that looks so good. I want that. Creating the fantasy.
For sure. Yeah. Creating the beautiful fantasy. And it's going to just save your day after a hard day at work or a hard day with the kids or hard week, blah, blah, blah. I think it can differ depending on the person, but I find for most people, especially if it's something like Halloween candy, Christmas candy, Valentine's candy, the stuff that happens every year. Okay. Right. Like Halloween's not going anywhere. Valentine's, it's that they're always going to be here in some shape or form. I actually think, and I loved your example that it changed for you over time. You've had these repeated Halloweens where now that relationship is different and it's shifted. The first thing that I find really helpful is for people to actually plan the candy in. Yeah. And plan it in when you're not there with the candy. And what I mean by that is like the night before or the morning of, if you know you have Halloween candy, you have a thing around it, great. This is a perfect time because when we have emotions around food, when we're with that food, just like you said, right? You're like kind of eyeing it, you're checking in on it, you're thinking about it. Okay. That's not the time to try to give yourself an opportunity to make a rational decision about food because you're not in your prefrontal cortex. You're in the other not so rational parts of your brain. So instead, if you can do it morning of, night before, just a little bit of time away from that, think about not your best self in terms of like the most perfect version of yourself, but for yourself in that day that's coming up, what would make you proud? And being proud might mean having 5 pieces of candy at the end of the day, 10, whatever, 2, 1, and then you have a bite of another one. You're like, oh, I'm over it. Fantastic. Your plan is completely yours and individual. But when we start to take the power out of the food and we just recognize it, to me, I had some Halloween candy, but for me, it's so hyper palatable that I'm just like, okay, you're kind of a cheap thrill candy, right? Like at this point, sure, it's fun. Yeah, but I just don't expect the Reese's Pieces to like fill me up. They don't have protein. They don't have fiber. They can't do that job for me. Yeah. But I think for so many of us, if we can just give ourselves a plan ahead of time, not to be perfectionistic, but just to say, oh, it's a little bit like reparenting, just like you were sharing, right? Like, what's this experience I want my kids to have? What's the experience that you'd like yourself to have? And then you can do that. And that's you taking action. And it might be uncomfortable. You might notice some urgent thoughts come up when you're now saying, okay, here are my 4 pieces. But you also might notice, whoa, I'm actually enjoying these pieces because I know, right? My brain doesn't have to do all of mental gymnastics that are taking me out of the present moment. I can actually just have these pieces, enjoy them, and then move on. And so many of us are just looking for that. And then I move on bit.
Yep. I think, and that's a really important thing to understand. And then I move on. I don't like even just, I think it was like putting my kids to bed one night, and I had set aside intentionally some pecans, some coconut, and some stevia dark chocolate chips. And I said, I am going to practice my self-discipline just for the heck of it tonight. And I'm not going to have these after dinner. I'm going to wait until after the kids are in bed. And I found I was so rushed to get the kids in bed because I wanted to get to my food. And so it's like, I wanted to get to the next thing. But I think that plan, that proactive planning of the candy is so critical. And that is exactly kind of what I said to you. I was going to plan to have 4 pieces and then maybe 2 pieces, or I planned to have 1 piece a day or 3 pieces a day. But can you talk about like the psychology? You said they're hyper palatable food. So what is the tendency to go into, like, if this is closer to Valentine's Day, Valentine's Day without a plan, what's the tendency there? Like, what mental tricks do we play on ourselves to get us to have more and more and more of what we don't actually want?
Yeah, I think that's when we get into that all or nothing thinking. We think, oh, this Valentine's Day, I'm going to be good. It's going to be one glass of wine. It's going to be maybe one dessert I share with my partner or whatever, you know. And then, of course, if we're not actually being honest with ourselves of what we want, so often I think we just try to jump ahead way too many steps. And then we wonder why that jump feels just horrible. It's like going in, if, you know, maybe this is not a great example, but it's like going into a gym and deciding your first day in that gym, you're going to do a 300-pound deadlift. Have you ever deadlifted before?
No.
Like, are you going to go do a 300-pound deadlift? Of course. And then you go, you try it, you can't actually do it. And then you beat yourself up that you couldn't do it. Well, we know that those expectations in that scenario are just wild and they're wildly inappropriate. But I think we kind of have to slow our roll when it comes to our relationships with food. That we might have these expectations that are just wildly beyond kind of our developmental relationship with the food. So it's going to take, like you said, I just love that you shared that it took a couple years and you noticed, right, every year, like it changed.
Yep.
Fantastic. You're in it for the long run. So what's the rush? Because also, I think we can get so hyper about this stuff. I think a lot of us forget the whole point of these healthy habits or thinking about our relationship with food is to feel good. And so when we really focus on feeling good, seriously, what's the rush? Let it be step by step, because it's only just going to get better when we do it that way.
And I think sometimes people neglect that, like, a little bit of progress is better than no progress at all. You know, James Clear has in his book, Atomic Habits, something about like the power of getting 1% better instead of like 30% better. But I think when you're creating those boundaries around food, what types of language do you encourage your clients to use? Because I think the language that we tell ourselves is really important. So I love how you said, think about what you would be proud of as you are right now, not like the ideal version of yourself. But like, how could someone say, well, I'm only going to have 4 pieces of candy? How would you tweak that language for them?
Yeah. Well, first off, I'd ask them, well, do you want 4 pieces of candy? Why is there that only there? What does that only represent? Yep. Usually our language is so indicative of our thinking. So that would be the first spot, is really just to dig in and say, like, what is it that you actually want? Because sometimes I think we can hold back, right? If I'm only going to have 4 pieces, that's me being good. Okay, but do you want 8 to 12? Do you want 20? Let's stop judging, right? Like, let's take all the expectations off the table. And again, slow our rolls. It's going to be boring. So many of my clients, we talk about it being boring. I'm like, great. This stuff, these habits, at the end of the day, like long term, they should kind of be like brushing your teeth. Like, do a lot of us have a big emotional reaction to brushing our teeth? I don't think so.
No.
Right? Maybe some of us don't want to floss. I love floss. That's just me. But how did we do that? Okay, we had maybe some caregivers, our parents teach us how to brush our teeth. We needed to spend a lot of time doing that at first when we were younger. And then over years, it became routine and rote. We were just doing that with food and nutrition. And I think the more space we offer ourselves, the easier it's going to go. And actually the faster it's going to go. It's kind of that like go slow to go fast old adage. But that's exactly the point, again, because it's going to feel better as well when you stop that mental habit. And a lot of us want to reinforce that kind of shaming, negative thinking because it's what's familiar. And our brains, even if it's uncomfortably comfortable, like having mean self-critical thinking, if that's what's most familiar, we'll keep going back to that innocently because our brains don't necessarily want to expend more energy doing something new. And what can feel new, especially, right, coming out of COVID and coming out of really stressful times for so many of us, what can be new, even though it's doing less, right, like relaxing more, playing with your dog more, having more, yummy, delicious, relaxing meals, that can feel totally foreign and brand new. So I think even having that awareness of showing your brain, okay, am I safe in this moment? Yes. Great. So I might be doing something different. Different is new and different are separate from bad and scary because our brains don't totally know that at first. So it's a little bit of that compassion of like, treat your brain kind of like a kiddo. They will know what to do, but don't expect too much from them at first because they're just learning.
Yeah. And think about how long it takes to shape children's behavior, and how much they resist it. I told Dawson, go brush your teeth. Like, yes. Okay. Like that's what your brain does when you're like, Morgan, let's try to cut back on the sugar. Like, okay. I think another thing that I always like to say is, let's change it from, I can only have 4 pieces. I love what you said about asking what you really want and getting creative. Like, do you really want that Halloween candy? Or do you want to instead go out to dinner and have a really good dessert?
Yeah.
Having some sort of carrot to dangle at the end, even if it's sugar related or not, but like ask yourself what you really want, and not just what you want today, but what you want the next day. Yeah. And so, okay, if you want to have that sugar today, do you also want the brain fog, the joint pain, the inflammation that's going to come the next day? And so if that's okay, like that's a trade-off. But I think sometimes people think about what they want in the moment and not necessarily what they want in the future and the consequences of their behavior. But instead of, I can only have 4, how does it feel different if you say, I will joyfully allow myself to have 4 pieces of candy? Yeah. So using the words like allowing, one of my members says joyfully allow. I love that because then, like you said, it makes you practice that intentional eating instead of just like being bitter that you only get 4,
Totally. Yeah. Exactly. It's so powerful. And it also takes the time pressure off as well. Mm-hmm. A lot of my clients, it's like, we're going to try this. Just try it. Or like I had a client yesterday and we did a check-in today and she was saying, she's like, I really didn't want to do my workout yesterday, but she's like, I just told myself, let me try it for 10 minutes. And then what happened? Oh, it felt really good. And she was really glad she did it by the end of the workout. So just giving yourself that chance to say, oh, just like your kiddo, right? Like, no, I don't want to brush my teeth. And still doing the action of doing the thing. They can coexist. And there's self-confidence that develops there as we practice that and we start to show ourselves, oh, I can have a certain thought about it. I can feel a little moody. Nothing's gone wrong. I'm a human having a human experience. And I'm going to go work out. Or like, I'm going to ask myself, what do I actually want? Do I want a beautiful flourless chocolate torte? And is this Reese's Pieces actually giving that to me? Yeah. Like just figuring that out is so powerful.
Yes. And now you're going to make me want that flourless chocolate torte.
Sounds good, right?
Yeah. No, this week, I think another tip is have a healthier alternative in mind. Like I made some, there's a brownies recipe from Levels Health that is really good. Like a low blood sugar spike brownie, I think is what they're called. And so I had some of those on hand. That way this week, if I wanted something sweet, I had something ready to go that I really, really enjoyed more than the regular added sugar anymore. So let's talk about another topic we wanted to talk about today was diet culture talk. And I think that we're all probably guilty of it unknowingly because like you, I was raised in the low fat era, the Weight Watchers era. All the people in the magazines were super skinny. Just so much messaging around what you look like, what your body is, how that means you're going to be successful in your relationships or your career. I don't know. I'm kind of curious to ask you this question. In our high school class, 1/3 of the girls that I knew of had an eating and or exercise disorder, myself included. So I had exercise bulimia for 10 months, and mine was more so driven towards athletic performance than body appearance. And then one day I just broke and I'm like, I'm done with this. I'm having all the brownies and all the cookies. And I never really developed binge eating or anything like that, but definitely a sugar problem, I would call it. And just kind of slowly learn more about nutrition and whatnot and exercise and how to do it in a healthy, balanced way. But I know that messaging really caused a lot of eating and exercise disorders, and people carry those into adulthood. So what were some of the things that growing up that you experienced that was like kind of diet culture talk that you had to unlearn and untrain your brain about?
What didn't I experience? If you've ever been a kid, an adolescent, like getting, turning into an adult when you're 80 pounds overweight, you hear everything. And I actually feel very lucky that I had childhood obesity, and that people, it can be so interesting at this point to say this, but I'm so glad people judged me based on how I looked, because it gave me, that's probably why I love the field of psychology, because it gave me such amazing insights into, whoa, people just judge others based on their own brains and their own thoughts that they have about themselves. So it also gave me, after a while, it wasn't fun during that time, but in the long run, it gave me a lot of compassion for other people to see, wow, look at how many people are in pain. And look at how many people try to relieve their own pain by putting that pain, knowingly or unknowingly, on others. And that's what it felt like to me. It's like when someone is making a really crappy comment about my body or other people's bodies in front of me, they were just trying to disperse their own pain. So to me, diet culture is kind of like this tea that we're all steeped in. So instead of trying to fight it, I see that a lot these days, is, you know, being anti-diet and
I know, yeah,
fight it. But to me, that fighting energy, yes, there's something to boldly claiming your own values. Okay. So I think there's a place for fighting and having anger, and I love that. But if we're always just trying to focus on things that we don't want, we're really never defining what it is we do want.
Yep.
And that to me is way more fun. It's way more compelling. So diet culture, I think when it's revealed to us, that's beautiful. We're going to have some thinking around it. But from there, it's way more about like, can I just let it go? It's here. Do I want to keep fighting it? Or do I want my fight to be me living my most peaceful, values-based, you know, whatever it is that lights you up? Would I like to just lead that life instead? To me, that's the biggest way that we ditch diet culture.
Well, how would you even define diet culture? Because I think if we are steeped in it, we may not recognize that we're in it. I mean, it's kind of like a fish in water. You know, how do we know that? What does the water look like? It's just normal to us. But like, what would you define as diet culture?
Yeah, I think diet culture is having negative thinking about ourselves and others, but primarily about ourselves. So I think even just having an inventory of what is it that I believe about myself? What are the feelings that if I were to jot down on a piece of paper how I felt about myself, what do I see? And is that something that I would want my child or my best friend or, you know, someone that I love? Would I want them to be thinking these things about themselves? If not, then that's probably some diet culture thinking that has crept in instantly, again, because we've grown up in that culture, the fish in the water or the frog in the boiling water, right? So that is a beautiful place to start. It's just jotting down, what do I actually think about myself? And you don't have to, again, this goes back to the beginning of our conversation. You don't then have to go be like, okay, to-do list, feel epic about myself 24/7, because we're all humans. We have moods. They go higher, they go lower, but really learning about how to, like I was saying before, step back from the thinking and see, oh, right now I maybe have been kind of programmed to have these negative thought loops, and they include what I think about my appearance, about my value, about my worth. Isn't that so interesting? I think that can be a very powerful place to start.
I think to me, diet culture is all about losing weight. And it's like, that is not the goal. Like the goal is not to just get skinny. Like there are plenty of skinny people who are not happy, who are unhealthy, mentally or physically, or both. And so to me, it's reframing that conversation, that internal dialect of I need to lose weight, or I only lost a pound this week, or I only lost a half pound this week. It's like, who cares? Who cares? No one can tell if you've lost a half pound this week or 1 pound this week. But what they can tell is your energy. What they can tell is your positivity. What they can tell is how are you showing up for yourself? What is your radiance like? You know, and it's like, so when we shift the goal from losing weight to developing a healthy lifestyle, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, you have so much more room for evidence in your brain, because now you're not relying on a number on the scale to dictate whether or not you were successful that week. And I think that to me is the ultimate diet culture. It's like the size of your pants, the number on the scale, that indicates that you are successful. And so it's like something, it's a mirage, first of all, that people are always chasing, that's always moving back, because really, if that's the goal, then you're never going to get there. If always getting skinnier is the goal, you're always going to want to get skinnier. So like, how do you help people reframe their mindset from a weight focused, I have to lose weight, I have to get skinnier, that's when I'm going to be happy.
Yeah.
To let's make it more values focused, make it more lifestyle focused, because you went through that. Like, I want to just kind of dig into your experience. Like, when you were 80 pounds overweight, did you think that losing weight would somehow, like, would it make you happier? Would it make you more confident? Like, did you have this picture about what it would be like 80 pounds less that either came true or didn't come true for you?
So when I lost the weight, what was interesting, and I mentioned this a couple minutes ago, but I can expand on it because it really was so transformative for me, was that I was the same me, just 80 pounds heavier and then 80 pounds lighter, right? Had the same thoughts, same heart, spoke in the same way. People treated me radically different. People are way kinder when I lost weight. People are really excited to talk about my weight, what I did, like suddenly I was really interesting to a lot of people. And I remember that and just being like, wow, I didn't change. I mean, yeah, my body changed. Really boring, right? And no one asked me, hey, is your energy better? Hey, right? Like those daily headaches, like, wow, those have gone. Because for me, what became so transformative, it was fun to see the number go down on the scale because previously I'd really only seen it go up, right? It like was a different experience. We'll honor that. The scale was going down and that was cool. But what was being shown to me over time was that I was feeling better. And that's what kept me hooked on living the healthier lifestyle. It didn't keep me hooked on the weight dropping down. So I find that similar with my clients. It's like, sure, start out with the diet culture thoughts. You kind of know you don't want them, but you kind of know they're there, but like they do something when you stop on the scale and it does you have an expectation that it's going to go down and it's gone up and blah, blah, blah. Great. But as you stick with the healthy habits, as you allow them to be as boring as brushing your teeth, you then start to feel better. And I think that really starts to rise without us having to take a lot of effort, because I think a lot of efforting also ties into diet culture. We think it has to be hard. We think it has to be arduous. We think we have to think a lot. So it is a little bit, sometimes with the coach, I'm like, you're going to have your own little experience client, right? Like there's no guruing here. There's no me telling you how it's going to go. You have to live your own life experience. But what I find is that when you start to have a sustainable lifestyle that feels good, that is what then becomes motivating. It's continuing to feel good because the dieting and trying to get super skinny doesn't actually feel good. And how many of us have lost weight in really drastic, restrictive ways, and we've gotten down to a lower scale weight, but we feel awful because we did it in a way that felt horrible. And then we regain, right? So that just goes to show us that it's not even about the weight loss. A lot of us have had that experience and we don't even recognize it. Like, oh my God, I did lose the weight and it sucked. And that's why I rebounded and it came back. So instead, it's like saying, oh yeah, it's going to be for me. And that's going to be different this time. That's what makes it sustainable. It's going to be boring, but there's beauty in boringness. I don't know. My husband and I, we have plenty of like times where it's super boring between us. I love that. We have lots of fun times too. Great. A great relationship. It flows with you. And to me, the relationship with our food and our bodies is similar. You want it to be kind of boring sometimes. That means you're on the right track.
Yeah. And I think we can't give up when it is. And I think, remember back like to that rhythm of life that we were talking about, I think a lot of people view dieting as like a hobby. And so they're used to that rhythm of yo-yo dieting, and they're not used to the boring nature of lifestyle changes. And so they think that they're doing something wrong or that it's not working because it's not working as fast. But I thought about what you were saying, and I think it's like the fuel to your car. So I think if we're thinking diet culture influence, we're thinking you're using gas in your car. It's kind of a more dirty fuel, essentially, for your mind. You know, you're taking actions from a place of not feeling good enough or not being good enough. I'm not thin enough. I have to keep going, efforting. So that's kind of the fuel driving the diet culture. Whereas I don't know what we call this, counter culture, like the lifestyle culture, maybe. It's a different fuel. It's a cleaner fuel. Maybe we'll call it the electric fuel.
Yeah.
And you're not like pushing anymore. You're not trying to get away from somewhere. You have a clear vision of where you're going, and you're fueled by that motivation, that desire, that that you said it feels good. You didn't have the headaches anymore and you had more energy and you didn't have the joint pain. So it's kind of like you're moving closer to your desires instead of away from what you don't want. You're moving towards what you do want. And I think that's another distinguishing factor of like the diet culture versus the lifestyle culture is we're not really moving away from something as much as we're moving toward what we want.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, I think the diet culture is there's extrinsic motivation. I gotta look this way. I can't be this way anymore. I should look like her, or he said, like all that stuff, versus the intrinsic motivation of, oh, this feels nice in my body. I honor that. I want that to be repeated.
I love that. So with a few minutes left, do you feel like you have any tips that you really want to share with the audience on how to connect, with that, with their values, with that lifestyle mindset, with their inner wisdom that you wanted to share with us today?
I think a first step, and this might sound just so silly and small, but I do find it to be very powerful, is just recognizing that your thoughts are not personal to you. And just allowing that to sink in without it being a whole practice and thing and homework that you got to do now. Just noticing that, letting that kind of percolate. When you have moods that are intense, right? And like frizzy. And when you have moods that are a little bit more low key, just notice, do the thoughts change with my moods? Isn't that so interesting? What do I think when I start to layer on this idea that my thoughts are not personal to me? They come and go. Thoughts are like, one example I like to give is that thoughts are like clouds, right? So our mental well-being is like the sun in the sky. It's always there. And our thoughts come and go. But if we try to hold on to a thought, right? That's like us trying to say, no, that cloud needs to stay there. Or, oh my God, that cloud is covering up the sun. That must mean that the sun is gone. No, we know that the sun will come when the clouds go. The same thing with our mental well-being. Let the thoughts, the one that feel really sticky, just give them the opportunity to come and go because the sunshine is right there.
I love that. Yeah, that's awesome. So any other tips, like any daily practices that you have found really helpful? I know you talk about like 6 kind of cornerstone health habits. Did you want to share those quick?
Yeah. And I always have them written down here because I list them out and then I'm like, wait, which ones have I listed?
Yeah.
So I have the 6 of them, which as we were talking before offline, these are probably the same ones that you have. But the first one is daily steps. I think for anyone working on a baseline of 7,000 daily steps, beautiful, right? Number 2, water, drinking around 70 ounces. There are a lot of sevens in here, 70 ounces of water or more a day. Great starting off point. Sleep, 7 or more hours of quality sleep, right? So looking at your sleep hygiene. The 4th is strength training. So 2, maybe 4 times a week. Are you challenging your muscles beyond walking or cardiovascular exercise? So are you resistance training? And are you continuing to challenge yourself? It's called progressive overload. So are you continually asking your muscles to work hard in the gym 2 to 4 times a week? And then balanced meals. So breakfast, which, oh my God, eat breakfast. You aren't eating breakfast, okay? Breakfast, lunch, dinner, maybe there's a snack and a dessert in there. Are you able to identify a source of protein, a source of carbohydrates, and a source of dietary fat, right? So is there a balance to those meals? That's hugely empowering, I think, for so many people. And then the last one is stress and mindfulness. So are you laughing or are you coming into the present moment for 7 minutes or more a day?
Yeah. Why 7? I'm curious. Like, why 7 minutes or more a day?
I think
is that like a number you like?
It just feels more approachable than 10 minutes. Something about 10 minutes or like 10,000 steps. I get 10,000 steps a day. It's hard, right? But something about 7,000 and 7 minutes, it makes it approachable. People are like, oh, I can try that. I can try to get to that.
Yeah. I like the number 7 anyways. All right. Thank you for this conversation today. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. Can you let people know where they can learn more about you?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been just a wonderful conversation. So you can find me at my website, luciahawley.com. I'm also very active on Instagram as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And if you guys have any questions, you can check her out on Instagram or her website. All right. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you.